The scream pierced the summer air like a siren, echoing off the pristine walls of the gated community. Karen Martinez floated motionless in the crystal-clear pool, her designer swimsuit, a stark contrast against the water, now tinged with something darker. Marcus Williams stood frozen in the doorway, his maintenance uniform still dripping from the sprinklers, his dark skin glistening with sweat and fear. But as the neighbors came running, as the sirens wailed in the distance, as accusations flew like bullets in the perfect suburban paradise, nobody knew that. Karen's scream wasn't about the man who'd just saved her life. It was about the secret she'd been drowning in long before she hit the water. The Mercedes SUV purred to a stop in the circular driveway of 1247 Willow Creek Lane, its pristine white paint reflecting the manicured lawns and perfect hedges that lined Riverside Estates like soldiers at attention. Karen Martinez stepped out, her Louboutin heels clicking against the imported Italian stones as she surveyed her domain with the satisfaction of someone who'd clawed their way to the top and intended to stay there at 42. Karen had perfected the art of suburban royalty. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in the kind of effortless waves that cost $300 to achieve, and her yoga-toned body was wrapped in a designer sundress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was the unofficial queen of Riverside Estates, the gated community where million-dollar homes stood as monuments to success and conformity. Mrs. Martinez, the voice came from behind her, deep and respectful. Karen turned to see Marcus Williams, approaching from the side gate, his Riverside maintenance uniform neat despite the August heat. At 35, Marcus carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who'd learned to navigate spaces where his presence was tolerated but never truly welcomed. "You're early," Karen said, her tone neutral, but her eyes already scanning for any of her neighbors who might be watching. The pool party was in 3 hours, and she couldn't afford any disruptions to her carefully orchestrated afternoon. "Traffic was lighter than expected," Marcus replied, adjusting the tool belt around his waist. "I can wait in the truck if you prefer." Karen waved him off with a gesture that was both dismissive and impatient. No, just get it done quickly. The pool filter has been acting up all week, and I have the entire neighborhood association coming over at 4. Marcus nodded and headed toward the backyard, his movements efficient and purposeful. Karen watched him go, then glanced around the street once more before following. She'd hired premium pool services 6 months ago after her previous company had become unreliable, and Marcus had been their best technician. He was professional, skilled, and most importantly, invisible in the way that service workers were expected to be in Riverside Estates. The backyard was Karen's pride and joy. Half acre of perfectly manicured paradise centered around a kidney-shaped pool that sparkled like a jewel. Imported palm trees provided strategic shade, while a built-in barbecue island and outdoor kitchen made entertaining effortless. It was the kind of space that graced the pages of luxury home magazines, and Karen had the photos to prove it. She settled into a poolside lounger, her phone already in hand as she began her daily ritual of social media management. Her Instagram account, at Karen Martinez Lifestyle, had over 50,000 followers who devoured her posts about luxury living, designer fashion, and the perfect family life. What they didn't know was that the perfect life required constant maintenance. Just like the pool, Mrs. Martinez. Marcus's voice interrupted her scrolling. "I'm seeing some unusual readings on the chemical levels. When was the last time you had the water tested?" Karen looked up from her phone, irritation flickering across her features. "I don't know, last week, the week before. That's what I pay you people for." Marcus knelt beside the pool's edge, his testing kit spread out methodically. "The chlorine levels are extremely high, dangerously high. Has anyone been swimming recently?" "Of course, people have been swimming. It's a pool." Karen's voice carried the sharp edge of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. "Just fix whatever's wrong, ma'am. I'm going to need to shock the system and let it cycle." "The party might need to be postponed?" "Absolutely not." Karen stood up, her shadow falling across Marcus as he worked. "I have 40 people coming over in 3 hours. The mayor, the city council president, half the country club board. This party is not being postponed." Marcus looked up at her, his dark eyes steady. "Mrs. Martinez, I understand the importance of your event, but swimming in water with these chemical levels could cause serious burns, respiratory issues, then fix it. Karen's voice cracked like a whip across the pristine backyard. I don't want to hear about problems. I want solutions. That's what I'm paying for. For a moment, something flickered in Marcus's expression, a flash of frustration, perhaps, or recognition of a familiar dynamic. But he simply nodded and returned to his work. I'll do what I can, but I can't guarantee you'll guarantee it. Because that's your job, Karen interrupted, already turning back to her phone, and do it quietly. I have calls to make. The next hour passed in relative silence, broken only by the hum of pool equipment and the occasional splash as Marcus worked. Karen divided her attention between her phone and covert observations of her employee, noting the way he moved with practiced efficiency, the careful attention he paid to every detail. She'd grown up in a world where people like Marcus were part of the scenery, invisible until needed, and she'd never questioned the arrangement. Her phone buzzed with a text from her husband, flying back early, landing at 3. See you at the party. Karen smiled, typing back a quick response. Richard's early return from his business trip was perfect timing. Having him there would add another layer of credibility to her carefully constructed image. Mrs. Martinez. Marcus's voice carried a note of concern that made Karen look up from her phone. I need to show you something, she sighed dramatically, but rose from her lounger, following him to the pool's edge where he'd set up his equipment. What now? The chemical imbalance isn't random, Marcus said carefully. Someone's been adding chemicals to this pool, a lot of them recently. Karen's face went pale beneath her professional tan. That's impossible. No one has access to the pool area except. She stopped, her mind racing through possibilities, implications, the carefully constructed world that suddenly felt less stable. Except who? Mrs. Martinez, the gardener, the housekeeper, my husband, ... Karen's voice trailed off as she stared at the crystal-clear water that had nearly become a death trap. But why would anyone? The sound of a car in the driveway made them both turn. Through the backyard's glass doors, Karen could see Richard's BMW pulling up to the house 3 hours early and completely unexpected. Her husband stepped out, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, his face wearing an expression she'd never seen before. Stay here, Karen commanded Marcus, her voice tight with sudden anxiety. Don't move, don't touch anything. She hurried toward the house, her heels clicking rapidly against the stone pathway. Behind her, Marcus stood motionless by the pool, his testing kit still spread out like evidence of something neither of them fully understood yet. Richard Martinez had built his fortune in real estate development, transforming empty lots into luxury communities like Riverside Estates. He was smooth, charismatic, and utterly devoted to the image of success that he and Karen had cultivated together. But the man who walked through their front door looked nothing like the polished executive who'd left for Denver 3 days ago. Karen's voice was carefully controlled, but her eyes were already cataloging details: the wrinkled shirt, the hollow look in his eyes, the way his hands shook slightly as he set down his briefcase. You're early. We need to talk. Richards. The voice was hoarse, as if he'd been shouting or crying or both, before the party. Before anyone else gets here. Karen felt something cold settle in her stomach. What happened in Denver? Richard looked at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through emotions she couldn't read. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. They know, Karen, about the money, about what we did. The words hit her like a physical blow, and Karen had to grip the marble countertop to keep her balance. Outside, through the glass doors, she could see Marcus still standing by the pool, professional and patient, waiting for instructions. He had no idea he was about to become a witness to the unraveling of everything she'd built. How much do they know? Karen asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Everton. Richard's laugh was bitter and broken. The FBI raided the Denver office this morning. They have documents, recordings, bank records. It's over. Karen closed her eyes, her mind racing through possibilities, escape routes, damage control strategies. When she opened them again, her expression had hardened into something sharp and desperate. No, she said firmly. It's not over. Not yet. But even as she spoke, Karen could feel the foundations of her perfect life beginning to crack. And she wondered if the chemicals in the pool were the least of her problems. The silence in the Martinez house stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the distant hum of pool equipment and the tick of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Karen stared at her husband, watching 20 years of marriage collapse in real time as Richard slumped against the kitchen island like a man who'd forgotten how to stand. "Tell me exactly what happened," Karen said, her voice taking on the commanding tone she used with contractors and service workers. Every detail. Richard's hands trembled as he loosened his tie. Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI Financial Crimes Division, she walked into the conference room at 9 a.m. with a team of 6 agents and enough paperwork to bury us both. He looked up at Karen, his eyes hollow. "They know about the Riverside Estates funding, the phantom investors, the shell companies. They know about the Martinez Foundation and where that money really went." Karen felt her world tilting, but her expression remained perfectly composed. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness was the fastest way to lose everything. "How much time do we have?" "They're probably getting the warrant for our arrest right now." Chen said they were giving me 24 hours as a courtesy professional. Courtesy, she called it, because of my cooperation with the investigation. "Your cooperation?" Karen's voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than screaming. "What exactly did you tell them, Richard?" Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. They both froze, staring at each other like deer caught in headlights. Karen moved to the front window, peering through the decorative glass. A black sedan sat in their driveway, its occupants obscured by tinted windows. "They're here," she breathed. "No," Richard said, checking his watch. "It's too early. The party guests aren't supposed to arrive for another hour." The doorbell rang again, followed by a sharp knock. Karen's mind raced through possibilities, strategies, ways to buy time. Then she remembered Marcus, still standing by the pool, still waiting for instructions, a witness to whatever was about to happen. "Go out the back," she told Richard. "Tell Marcus to leave. Pay him, thank him, get him out of here now." "Karen, what are you? Just do it," she hissed, then smoothed her hair and walked to the front door. Agent Sarah Chen was exactly what Karen had expected, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, wearing a conservative suit that screamed federal law enforcement. She stood flanked by 2 other agents, their badges visible but their expressions carefully neutral. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Agent Chen, FBI. We'd like to speak with you and your husband about some financial irregularities involving your business operations." Karen's smile was perfect, practiced, the same one she used for charity galas and social media photos. "Of course, Agent Chen, though I'm afraid we're expecting guests shortly for a neighborhood association meeting. Perhaps we could schedule something for next week?" Through the glass doors, Karen could see Richard approaching Marcus by the pool. Their conversation looked tense, urgent. Marcus kept glancing toward the house, clearly aware that something was wrong. "Certainly," Karen said, stepping aside to let the agents enter. "Though I should mention, we have a maintenance worker here. Today, he's been servicing our pool system." Agent Chen's eyes sharpened. "We'd like to speak with him as well, actually. We understand you've had some recent work done on your property." Karen's blood turned to ice. They knew about the pool. Somehow, they knew about the pool. "I'm not sure what pool maintenance would have to do with Mrs. Martinez," Agent Chen interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "We have reason to believe that evidence related to our investigation may have been concealed or destroyed on your property. We'd like to conduct a search. Do you have a warrant? We can get one. But we were hoping for your cooperation." Karen's mind raced. The FBI wouldn't be here without probable cause, wouldn't be asking about the pool without knowing something, but what could they possibly know about the pool that she didn't? Outside, she watched Richard hand Marcus an envelope payment for his services. She assumed, but instead of leaving, Marcus was shaking his head, pointing at his equipment, clearly explaining something about the work not being finished. "Mrs. Martinez," Agent Chen's voice brought her back to the present. "Your decision." "Of course," Karen said, her smile never wavering. "We have nothing to hide." The lie came so easily she almost believed it herself. Agent Chen nodded to her companions, and they immediately began moving through the house with practiced efficiency. Karen followed them, her heart pounding but her expression calm. Everything depended on maintaining the facade, on buying time to figure out what they knew, and how much trouble she was really in. They were examining the home office when she heard the splash. The sound was wrong, too loud, too sudden, followed by a shout that made everyone freeze. Karen ran toward the back of the house, the the FBI agents closed behind, just in time to see Marcus Williams pulling Richard from the pool, both men soaked and gasping. "What happened?" Karen called out, rushing. "Through the patio doors. Your husband slipped," Marcus said, helping Richard to his feet. Hit his head on the pool edge. The chemical's eye tried to warn him about the chemical levels. Richard stood dripping by the pool edge, a cut on his forehead bleeding freely. But his eyes were locked on Karen's, with an intensity that made her stomach drop. He'd been trying to retrieve something from the pool, something he'd thrown in there during one of his late-night visits home when she thought he was traveling. "Sir, are you all right?" Agent Chen was beside Richard now, professional, concern masking what Karen was certain was intense interest in the situation. "I'm fine," Richard said, but his voice shook. "Just clumsy. The pool deck was wet." Marcus was gathering his equipment, his movements quick and efficient. "Mrs. Martinez, I really need to finish the chemical treatment. The levels are still dangerous." "Actually," Agent Chen said, her voice carrying new authority, "we're going to need everyone to step away from the pool area. This is now part of our investigation." Karen felt the world tilt again. Investigation. It was just an accident, Mrs. Martinez. "We have evidence suggesting that financial documents and computer hardware may have been disposed of in your pool system. We're going to need to drain it completely and examine the contents." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. Richard had been disposing of evidence in their pool, using the chemical system to destroy documents, hard drives, anything that could connect them to the fraud. And now the FBI knew. "That's impossible," Karen said, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus looked between them, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Mrs. Martinez, when I tested the water today, I found traces of metals, plastics, paper fibers. I thought maybe construction debris, but you're trained to recognize the signs of document destruction, aren't you, Mr. Williams?" Agent Chen's question was directed at Marcus, but her eyes never left Karen's face. Marcus nodded slowly. "I served 2 tours in Iraq. Part of my job was environmental cleanup, including sites where sensitive materials had been destroyed. The chemical signature is distinctive." Karen felt her legs go weak. Not only had Richard been destroying evidence in their pool, but he'd been caught by someone who actually knew what to look for. The maintenance worker she'd treated as invisible, as part of the scenery, was about to become the key witness in their destruction. "Mr. Williams," Agent Chen continued, "we're going to need you to stay and assist with the pool examination. Your expertise could be valuable." "Of course," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. But Karen caught the look he gave, her not accusatory, not triumphant, just profoundly sad, as if he'd seen this story before and knew exactly how it would. "Yes," Karen agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. "We do." But as she watched the FBI agents begin cordoning off her perfect backyard, as neighbors started gathering at the edges of the property drawn by the commotion, as Marcus Williams quietly explained to Agent Chen exactly what he'd found in the pool that morning, Karen realized that all the lawyers in the world couldn't save them now. The party was supposed to start in an hour. The mayor was coming, the city council president, half the country club board, and instead of celebrating another successful social event, Karen Martinez was about to watch her entire life get dredged up from the bottom of her swimming pool. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years floating on the surface of her perfect life, never imagining that the bottom would eventually rise up to drag her down. The pool area had transformed into a crime scene within minutes. Yellow tape fluttered in the humid August air while FBI technicians in white hazmat suits began setting up equipment that looked more suited to a laboratory than a backyard in Riverside Estates. Karen stood on her own patio, now officially a suspect in her own home, watching her carefully constructed world dissolve like the chemicals Richard had been dumping into their pool. "Mrs. Martinez, we're going to need you to contact your guests," Agent Chen said, approaching with a clipboard and the kind of professional detachment that made Karen's skin crawl. "This party cannot happen today." "You can't do this," Karen said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "These people, the mayor, the city council they're expecting to attend a party hosted by someone who isn't under federal investigation." Agent Chen replied smoothly, "I suggest you come up with a convincing story. Food, poisoning, perhaps. Family emergency." Karen's hands shook as she pulled out her phone, scrolling through the guest list that had taken weeks to perfect. Each name represented a connection, a relationship, a piece of the social architecture that kept her world intact. Canceling would raise questions, create suspicions, set tongues wagging throughout Riverside Estates. Karen. Richard's voice was hollow as he approached, a towel draped around his shoulders and a bandage on his forehead. We need to talk. Privately. Agent Chen nodded toward the house. You have 5 minutes. Agent Rodriguez will be with you. They walked into their kitchen, the same space where Karen had prepared countless meals for charity events, where she'd posed for Instagram photos showcasing her perfect domestic life. Now it felt like a stage set for a tragedy she couldn't escape. How long? Karen asked, the moment they were alone with Agent Rodriguez positioned discreetly by the door. 6 months, Richard said, his voice breaking. Ever since the Denver audit started. I thought I could fix it, thought I could replace the money before anyone noticed. 6 months. Karen's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. You've been destroying evidence in our pool for 6 months. Not just evidence, the backup servers, the encrypted drives, the paper trails, everything that could connect us to the Riverside Estates fraud. Richard's hands shook as he ran them. Through his hair, I dissolved hard drives in acid, burned documents, used the pool's chemical system to break down anything that could trace back to us. Karen stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the man she'd married 20 years ago. Not the successful developer, not the charming social climber, but a desperate, terrified criminal who'd been poisoning their pool to hide his crimes. What about the foundation money? She asked. Gone. I used it to cover the Riverside Estates shortfall, but that just made everything worse. The FBI has been tracking shell companies, phantom investors, charitable donations that never reached their intended recipients. Richard's laugh was bitter. They know about the Miami condo, the Swiss accounts, the art purchases, everything. Through the kitchen window, Karen could see Marcus Williams working with the FBI technicians, his maintenance expertise now being used to map out exactly what had been destroyed in their pool. The man she'd dismissed as invisible was methodically cataloging every piece of evidence Richard had tried to eliminate. Time's up, Agent Rodriguez announced as they walked back toward the patio. Karen's phone began buzzing incessantly. The first guests were arriving early, their cars pulling up to the house, only to encounter FBI vehicles and crime scene tape. She watched through the front window as Mayor Patricia Hendricks stepped out of her Lexus, her face cycling through confusion, concern, and finally, recognition of political disaster. Mrs. Martinez, Agent Chen called out, we need to speak with you about your role in the Martinez Foundation. Karen's stomach dropped. The foundation had been her project, her way of building social credibility while providing tax benefits for their increasingly questionable business dealings. She'd hosted charity galas, organized fundraising events, posed for photos with underprivileged children who would never see a penny of the money raised in their names. I had nothing to do with the financial management, Karen said quickly. Richard handled all of that. I was just the public face. The public face who signed documents authorizing fund transfers, who attended board meetings where financial decisions were made, who personally approved charitable donations that were never distributed. Agent Chen's voice was mad, but each word felt like a nail in Karen's coffin. Marcus approached from the pool area, his expression grim. Agent Chen, you need to see this. They followed him to where technicians had set up a filtration system to collect debris from the pool's bottom. Spread across white plastic sheets were the remains of what had once been sophisticated computer equipment, melted hard drives, corroded metal fragments, and what looked like the remnants of paper documents. Based on the chemical analysis and the distribution pattern, Marcus explained, this has been going on for months. Systematic destruction of materials, using the pool's circulation system to distribute the chemical breakdown process evenly. Agent Chen nodded, then turned to Karen. Mrs. Martinez, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. Am I under arrest? Not yet, but that could change quickly depending on your level of cooperation. Karen looked around her backyard one more time. The imported palm trees, the custom stonework, the infinity pool that had been featured in Architectural Digest. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built, was about to be seized as evidence. In a federal investigation, I want to call my lawyer, she said. Of course. But first, we need you to help us understand something. Agent Chen pulled out a tablet, showing Karen a bank statement. These are deposits into your personal account. Substantial amounts transferred from the Martinez Foundation over the past 18 months. Can you explain these transactions? Karen's mind raced. The money had been Richard's Idea Foundation funds transferred to their personal accounts, supposedly for business expenses that were never properly documented. She'd signed the authorizations without reading them carefully, trusting Richard to handle the details. Those were legitimate business expenses, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Business expenses like your Mercedes, your jewelry, your trip to Europe last spring. Agent Chun's tone was conversational, but her eyes were sharp. We've traced every dollar, Mrs. Martinez, the foundation money that was supposed to go to homeless, shelters, children's hospitals, food banks. It went to fund your lifestyle. The words hit Karen like a physical blow. She'd convinced herself that the foundation was legitimate, that they were actually helping people while also helping themselves. But seeing the evidence laid out in black and white, she realized she'd been living a lie for years. I want my lawyer, Karen repeated, but her voice was barely audible. Of course, but first I need you to understand something. Agent Chen gestured toward the pool, where technicians were still collecting evidence. Your husband's attempts to destroy evidence have actually made our case stronger. The chemical analysis will show exactly what was destroyed and when. And Mr. Williams, testimony about the chemical levels will establish a timeline that matches our financial records perfectly. Karen looked at Marcus, who was standing quietly by the pool equipment, his face carefully neutral. In 6 hours, her life had gone from perfect to completely destroyed, and the man she'd barely noticed, the one she'd treated as part of the scenery, was going to be the key witness in her downfall. There's something else, Agent Chen continued. We've been monitoring your social media accounts, Mrs. Martinez, the photos of charitable events, the posts about foundation work, the carefully crafted image of philanthropy and community service. Every post is evidence of the fraud you were perpetrating. Karen's Instagram account 50,000 followers, who'd watched her build what they thought was a life of meaningful luxury, was now evidence in a federal case. The perfect life she'd documented so carefully was about to become a public record of her crimes. As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone buzzed with notifications. The first news reports were already online, and her social media was exploding, with comments from followers who just learned that their lifestyle inspiration was actually a federal fugitive, Mrs. Martinez. Agent Chun's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you ready to come with us? Karen looked one more time at her backyard. At the pool that had been both her pride and her downfall. At Marcus Williams, who was methodically documenting the evidence that would send her to prison. Then she nodded, her perfect mask finally slipping to reveal the terrified woman beneath. Yes, she whispered. I'm ready. But as they walked toward the FBI vehicles, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she was anything but ready for what was coming next. The FBI field office in downtown was a stark contrast to the manicured perfection of Riverside Estates. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across beige walls that had witnessed countless confessions, denials, and the slow collapse of carefully constructed lies. Karen sat in interview room 3, her designer dress now wrinkled and her perfect makeup smeared, waiting for her lawyer while Agent Chen prepared what would likely be the most important conversation of her life. Across town, Marcus Williams stood. In his own kind of interrogation room, though this one had windows and offered coffee instead of handcuffs, he'd been asked to stay as a witness, his expertise in chemical analysis and environmental cleanup making him an unexpected key player in the FBI's case. Mr. Williams, Agent Chen's partner, Agent Rodriguez, sat across from him with a digital recorder between them. Let's go through this one more time. When you first arrived at the Martinez property today, what exactly did you observe? Marcus leaned back in his chair, his maintenance uniform now dry but still carrying the faint scent of chlorine. The chemical readings were off the charts. Chlorine levels that would burn skin on contact, pH completely out of balance, and traces of metals and organic compounds that don't belong in a swimming pool. And in your professional opinion, what caused these readings? Someone had been using that pool as a chemical disposal site. Systematically, over several months, Marcus's voice was steady, professional. I've seen similar signatures in Iraq, at sites where sensitive materials were destroyed using chemical processes. Agent Rodriguez nodded. Did Mrs. Martinez seem aware of these chemical levels? Marcus paused, remembering Karen's dismissive attitude, her impatience with his warnings about the danger. She didn't seem to care. When I told her the water was dangerous, that people could be seriously hurt, she just wanted me to fix it quickly so her party could go on as planned. Even after you explained the risks, especially after I explained the risks, Marcus's expression darkened. She was more concerned about her image than about people's safety. Meanwhile, in interview room 3, Karen's lawyer had finally arrived. James Whitmore was exactly what Karen had expected, aggressive and already calculating. The media strategy that would minimize the damage to what remained of her reputation. Don't say anything, Whitmore advised as he settled into the chair beside her. Not until we understand exactly what they have. But Agent Chen was already spreading evidence across the table bank, statements, foundation records, social media, posts, and photographs from the pool scene. The documentation was overwhelming, methodical, and damning. Mrs. Martinez, Agent Chen began, "We've been investigating the Martinez Foundation for 18 months. We know about the phantom donations, the shell companies, the personal expenses charged to charitable accounts. What we want to understand is your role in the operation." Karen looked at her lawyer, who nodded slightly. "My client maintains her innocence in any financial irregularities." Mrs. Martinez was the public face of the foundation, not involved in day-to-day financial management. Is that so? Agent Chen pulled out a tablet, showing Karen a video clip. "This is from your Instagram account, posted 6 months ago. You're standing in front of the Children's Hospital in Phoenix, announcing a $100,000 donation. From the Martinez Foundation, Karen watched herself on screen, perfectly dressed and smiling broadly as she presented an oversized check to the hospital administrator. She remembered the day, clearly, the photo opportunities, the local news coverage, the social media engagement that had driven her follower count even higher. That donation was never made, Agent Chen continued. The check was fake. The hospital never received a penny. But you posted about it extensively, using it to raise more money that also never reached its intended recipients. My client was told the donation had been processed," Whitmore began. "Your client signed the authorization forms," Agent Chen interrupted. "She approved the press release, posed for photos, and promoted the fake donation across all her social media platforms. Either she was complicit in the fraud, or she was criminally negligent in her duties as foundation director." Karen felt the walls closing in. Every post, every photo, every carefully crafted image she'd shared was now evidence against her. Her Instagram account, her pride and joy, her connection to 50,000 followers who'd admired her lifestyle, had become a detailed record of her crimes. "There's more," Agent Chen said, pulling out another set of documents. "We've traced foundation funds to your personal accounts, your luxury purchases, your lifestyle expenses. This isn't just fraud, Mrs. Martinez. This is theft from charities, from people who trusted you with their donations." Karen's phone, which had been buzzing constantly, suddenly went silent. Whitmore glanced at it, then at Karen. "Your social media accounts have been suspended pending investigation. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all of them." The news hit Karen. Like a physical blow, 50,000 followers who'd watched her build what they thought was a perfect life were now seeing her true story unfold in real time through news reports and FBI press releases back in the witness room. Marcus was providing Agent Rodriguez with a detailed timeline of the Martinez property's chemical readings over the past 6 months, pool maintenance records, chemical purchase orders, his own notes about unusual readings, and unexplained equipment malfunctions. "Mr. Williams, you service other properties in Riverside Estates, correct? About 15 homes total. I've been doing pool maintenance in that community for 3 years. Have you ever seen chemical readings like what you found at the Martinez property?" Marcus shook his head. Never. Not even close. What Richard Martinez was doing, that level of chemical manipulation, the systematic destruction of materials, it's not something you stumble into. It's deliberate, planned, and extremely dangerous. Agent Rodriguez made notes. Dangerous. How those chemical levels could have killed someone. If any of the party guests had gone swimming today, if children had been in that pool. voice trailed off. Mrs. Martinez was willing to risk people's lives to maintain her perfect image. In interview room 3, Agent Chen was laying out the full scope of the government's case. Financial records showing millions in stolen foundation money. Witness statements from intended charity recipients who'd never received promised donations. And social media evidence documenting Karen's lavish lifestyle funded by fraud. Mrs. Martinez, we're prepared to offer you a deal, Agent Chen said. Full cooperation in the investigation of your husband's financial crimes, complete disclosure of all foundation activities, and agreement to asset forfeiture. In exchange, we'll recommend reduced charges and a shorter sentence. Karen looked at her lawyer, who was already calculating the options. What kind of sentence are we talking about? Without cooperation, 15 to 20 years. With full cooperation and asset forfeiture, possibly 5 to 7. 5 to 7 years, Karen tried to imagine spending that much time in federal prison, watching her perfect life become a cautionary tale shared in business schools and criminology courses. Everything she'd built, everything she'd worked for, reduced to a case study in white-collar crime. I need time to consider, she began. Mrs. Martinez, Agent Chen interrupted. While you're considering your options, your husband is already negotiating his own deal. He's agreed to full cooperation and asset forfeiture. The question is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. Karen felt her last hope crumble. Richard had abandoned her, choosing to save himself rather than face the consequences together. Their 20-year marriage, their shared crimes, their mutual destruction of evidence. None of it mattered now. It was every person for themselves. What would cooperation entail? Whitmore asked. Everything, Agent Chen replied. Bank accounts, offshore holdings, art purchases, luxury items, real estate holdings, complete financial disclosure and testimony against co-conspirators, and most importantly, a full accounting of every dollar stolen from the Martinez Foundation. Karen closed her eyes, seeing again the faces of the children she'd posed with at charity events, the hospital administrator she'd lied to, the donors who'd trusted her with their money. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt the full weight of what she'd done, not just the financial crimes, but the betrayal of people who'd believed in her, who'd thought she was using her privilege to help others. I'll cooperate, she said quietly. Karen Whitmore began. I'll cooperate, she repeated, her voice stronger now. I'll tell you everything, Agent Chen nodded, already reaching for the necessary forms. We'll start with the foundation records. Every fake donation, every diverted fund, every lie you told to cover up the theft. As Karen began signing documents that would dismantle her entire life, she couldn't help but think about Marcus Williams, the maintenance worker who'd uncovered the evidence that destroyed her world. He'd been invisible to her for months, just another service provider in her perfect ecosystem, but he'd seen what she'd tried to hide, recognized the signs of systematic destruction, and had the expertise to expose the truth. The irony was perfect and bitter. The woman who'd built her life on being seen, on being admired, on being the center of attention, had been. 6 hours later, the sun was setting over Riverside Estates, casting long shadows across the crime scene that had once been Karen Martinez's backyard paradise. The FBI technicians had drained the pool completely, revealing a concrete tomb filled with the skeletal remains of hard drives, melted plastic, and corroded metal fragments that told the story of systematic evidence destruction spanning months. Marcus Williams stood beside Agent Chen, both of them surveying the wreckage as the last of the evidence was catalogued and bagged. The pool that had been featured in architectural digests now looked like an archaeological dig, each layer of debris marking another month of Richard Martinez's desperate attempts to hide his crimes. Mr. Williams, Agent Chen said, your testimony is going to be crucial. The chemical analysis, the timeline you've established, the professional expertise you've provided, it's turned what could have been a financial fraud case into something much more serious. Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. Agent Chen, there's something else you should know. About the community, about how this is going to affect the other residents. What do you mean? I service 15 homes in Riverside Estates. Every single one of those families trusted Richard Martinez with their investments, their property values, their community's reputation. When this story breaks fully, it's not just the Martinez family that's going to be destroyed. Agent Chen understood immediately. Riverside Estates had been marketed as an exclusive community developed by Richard Martinez, with property values and social status tied directly to his reputation. The fraud wouldn't just bankrupt the Martinez family, it would devastate an entire neighborhood of innocent people who'd trusted him with their most valuable assets. "We're aware of the broader implications," Agent Chen said. "The Securities and Exchange Commission is already investigating the property investments. There may be additional victims we haven't identified yet." Inside the FBI field office, Karen was 3 hours into her cooperation agreement, methodically dismantling 20 years of carefully constructed lies. The conference room was filled with documents, bank statements, and photographs that told the story of the Martinez Foundation's transformation from legitimate charity to elaborate money laundering operation. "The children's hospital donation was Richard's idea," Karen said, her voice hoarse from hours of testimony. "He said we needed a high-profile donation to establish credibility, something that would attract major donors and media attention." Rodriguez made notes while recording equipment captured every word. "But you knew the donation was never going to be made." Karen hesitated, then nodded. "I knew the foundation didn't have the money, but Richard promised me he would replace it with legitimate funds from his development projects. He said it was just temporary, just until we could get the foundation's finances stabilized." "And you believed him?" "I wanted to believe him." Karen's voice cracked. The social media response was incredible. My follower count doubled overnight. I was getting interview requests from lifestyle magazines, invitations to speak at charity galas. The fake donation made me famous. Agent Chen entered the room, carrying a tablet showing Karen's suspended social media accounts. "Mrs. Martinez, we've been monitoring the public response to your arrest. I think you should see this." Karen looked at the screen, her face growing pale as she read the comments flooding her suspended accounts. 50,000 followers had become 50,000 prosecutors, each one expressing their betrayal and anger at discovering their lifestyle inspiration was actually a federal criminal. #Karen Martinez fraud is trending, Agent Chen said. "People are sharing screenshots of your posts, comparing your claimed charitable donations with the reality of what was actually distributed. It's gone viral." Karen watched her digital reputation implode in real time. Fashion bloggers who'd featured her outfits were issuing apologies. Lifestyle magazines were pulling articles about her home design. Corporate sponsors were canceling partnerships she'd spent years building. "There's more," Agent Chen continued. "We've received calls from over 200 people who donated to the Martinez Foundation based on your social media posts. They want to know where their money went." The number hit Karen like a physical blow. 200 people who'd trusted her, who'd believed in her message of luxury with purpose, who'd given their hard-earned money to what they thought was a legitimate charity. Each one was now a victim of her fraud, a person whose trust she'd betrayed for the sake of maintaining her perfect image. "I want to make this right," Karen said suddenly. "Whatever assets I have left, whatever I can liquidate, I want it to go to the charities we stole from." Agent Rodriguez looked surprised. "Mrs. Martinez, asset forfeiture is already part of your plea agreement. You don't have a choice about surrendering your property." "I know that, but I want to do more. I want to personally apologize to every donor, every charity, every person we hurt. I want to use my social media platform if I ever get it back to tell the truth about what we did." Agent Chen and Agent Rodriguez exchanged glances. This level of cooperation was unusual, especially from someone who'd spent the morning denying any wrongdoing. "Mrs. Martinez," Agent Chen said carefully, "you understand that full cooperation means testifying against your husband, providing evidence that will ensure his conviction, and admitting to crimes that will destroy what's left of your reputation." Karen nodded. "I understand. But I also understand that I've been living a lie for years. I've been stealing from people who trusted me, lying to followers who believed in me, and pretending to be someone I'm not. Maybe it's time to finally tell the truth." Meanwhile, at Riverside Estates, the first news vans had arrived. Reporters and camera crews were setting up outside the Martinez property, their bright lights illuminating the crime scene tape and FBI vehicles. Neighbors gathered in small groups, their faces showing a mixture of shock, anger, and fear about what the Martinez scandal would mean for their own property values. Mayor Patricia Hendricks stood at the edge of the property, fielding questions from reporters while trying to manage the political fallout. The Martinez family had been major donors to her campaigns, and their foundation had partnered with the city on several high-profile charitable initiatives that were now revealed to be fraudulent. The city had no knowledge of any financial irregularities. Mayor Hendricks told the cameras, "We trusted the Martinez Foundation just as the community did. We are as shocked and disappointed as anyone." But privately, the mayor was already calculating the political damage. Her association with the Martinez family, her appearances at their charity events, her praise for their community contributions, all of it was now evidence of her poor judgment and lack of oversight. Marcus Williams watched the media circus from his work truck, parked across the street from the Martinez property. He'd given his statement to the FBI, provided his expert testimony about the chemical evidence, and helped build the case that would send both Karen and Richard Martinez to federal prison. Now he was just another witness to the spectacular collapse of a perfect life built on lies. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor. "Great work today. Media wants to interview you about the chemical analysis. You okay with that?" Marcus considered the question. He could become part of the story. The working-class hero who'd brought down the wealthy criminals. His expertise and testimony would be featured in news reports. His face would be on television. His role in the investigation would make him briefly famous. But that wasn't what he wanted. He'd seen enough of what fame and attention could do to people. Karen Martinez had built her entire life around being seen, being admired, being the center of attention, and it had destroyed her. "No interviews," he texted back. "Just want to do my job." As the sun set completely and the media lights illuminated the Martinez property like a movie set, Marcus started his truck and drove away. Tomorrow he'd be back to servicing pools and riverside estates, helping families maintain their little pieces of paradise. But he'd never again assume that the perfect surface was an indicator of what lay beneath. Behind him, the Martinez house stood empty, its windows dark and its perfect landscaping now trampled by FBI agents and news crews. The dream of Riverside. Estates the promise of luxury, exclusivity, and success had been revealed as nothing more than an elaborate fraud. And Karen Martinez, the woman who'd spent years crafting the perfect image, was about to learn that the truth, while painful, was the only foundation worth building a life on.